Dana Holgorsen famously once said, "You can't win with West Virginia players, and it's really hard to recruit at West Virginia." When you look at the team this season, full of West Virginia players, it makes you wonder, was Dana right about what he said? I brought on somebody, a special guest from Locked On Sports, and we're going to talk to him about that and preview the game right after this word from our sponsor. This episode of Mountaineer Paul Talks Football is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive. Where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, Jeep, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing. Only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you.
This is for Cameron.
What is up, guys? Welcome in. My name is Mountaineer Paul. You've landed at another edition of Mountaineer Paul Talks Football, guys, and we got a special episode for you today. Well, it's actually tonight where I'm at. We're going to talk about this Houston thing. We're going to talk about Dana a little bit. And I brought somebody who would be considered an expert on that very subject, somebody that I have watched from afar for quite some time now. He does a really good job covering the Houston Cougars. We're talking about Patker Ainsworth from Locked On. How are we doing, Parker?
I'm good, man. I have to chuckle that y'all still like Dana is unanimous. Everyone knows the name Dana. There's one Dana. It's like Cher. There's one Dana.
There's one Dana. Yeah, and Red Bull does run through his veins at all times. They say it's a myth. It's a myth that we've heard. So obviously not the start the Houston Cougs wanted. A loss to Rice, a loss to teams that you just wouldn't have pictured in the preseason you guys lose to. Dana was really confident in the preseason about this Houston Cougars team. What do you think it is, Parker, that just hasn't clicked yet, and why?
Well, thus far, so they're 2-3, and admittedly, I might have picked them to be 3-2 right now. I might have said 4-1 if I'm being optimistic. They haven't put together two halves of football in any game, let alone the games that they've lost. It seems to be like in the Rice game you mentioned, they got down 28-0 before reeling off 35 straight unanswered points, right? Like the second half against Rice, if they played two halves like that, would have won the football game. The first half against Texas Tech, a couple special teams miscues, and they're still only down by 7 at halftime. Offense put up 28 points for half, 35-28, and they end up losing 49-28, right? Like, can't put it together. TCU, it was 20-13 at halftime, and they end up losing 36-13, right? Like, they're in the game and competitive within these losses for the half, and something falls apart. You had your own experience with Dana, so I don't need to go a whole lot down that road about sometimes he doesn't always own those kinds of things, right? He's quick to pass the buck on some of that. But I do think it's interesting, like I don't mean to give him too much credence. I get people think I like him more than I do. But he is right that sometimes it also comes down to execution, right? If they call a halfback ISO, even if it's out of the shotgun, if they call halfback ISO on 4th and 1, it's not always on the play call. Like, I guess you could fix it or whatever, but like sometimes you got to get the yard. And they've had mistakes across all those boards last year. We'll get into it a lot more, I'm sure, but it's been a year we haven't seen a full 60 minutes of Houston Cougar football yet. It's been ugly, to say the least.
Donovan has had stretches where he's looked really good for you guys. I think he outgained the Texas Tech quarterback, Maren Morton, last week by a pretty large margin. He's a guy that probably really juiced up for that game. I have physically, he's a specimen. If you put him beside, I would say there's 69 Power 5 quarterbacks. He probably looks better than 60 of them, right? If you line them up side by side. This kid is a specimen, seriously.
He'd get off the bus first.
Oh, yeah. And this dude just throws, he throws it is got so much velocity on the ball when he throws it. And you just wonder, is he ever going to put it all together? Obviously, changing schools makes that difficult. He's still learning some of that system. But what has been your overall impression of that quarterback, and what are some things he needs to clean up?
So I have to say that I give him a lot of credit for coming in and learning a new system because what he's doing, what he's been asked to do at Houston, what he was asked to do at Texas Tech are very, very different.
Right.
I will say I thought that he'd be a little bit more elusive runner. I knew he ran people over. I don't mean to say that I had any questions about that, but I thought he had a little bit more speed in his wheels than he's shown. He's had he's I think in avoiding the turnovers he had at Texas Tech, because did get a little turnover prone over there for a minute. He's probably held on the ball a little long and taken some sacks at Houston, right? If you're trying to be like, instead of turning it over, he's taking sacks. And situationally, I don't know which is better there. I think at the end of the day, you probably don't want to turn the ball over, but sacks aren't great either. I do think you mentioned getting amped for Tech. He looked so good, like just looked phenomenal in the first half. Throwing strikes, reading defenses, running around, like making dudes miss when it was his turn to run the ball. The first
That's
half
a
against
pretty
Texas,
good defense.
the first half against Texas Tech, he looked really good. And then at halftime, they didn't make a whole bunch of adjustments. They just kind of flipped their coverage where instead of Texas Tech did a couple very simple things. And it looked like a whole different offense second half. We couldn't get anything rolling, couple 3-and-outs. And then we only got the ball a handful of times because Texas Tech was running and just giving the ball to that Taj Brooks, like he wants to say Taj Brooks kid, and handed it off. And, it all went downhill and kind of the wheels fell off. But the first half against Tech, man, he looked super good. So we're hoping that that's kind of like the sign of a kid that has picked up the offense and continues to grow from there. Bluntly, like they played TCU and went the entire game without an offensive touchdown. They played UTSA and put up all of 2 touchdowns. One was in like late third quarter. Rice, I mentioned they had 35 unanswered points, but they also went almost a whole half, the first half, without a touchdown, right? So like it's been a roller coaster, but hopefully we're building off something good there at the most recent part.
Absolutely. You look at Houston on the lines of scrimmage, and I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say West Virginia is going to be probably far and away the most physical team that they've played so far. Texas Tech has a really good front. They've got a few good defensive tackles. So does TCU. But West Virginia rolls in 11 at last count defensive linemen, and I've never been able to say this. There is literally almost no drop off between 1 and 11. Only experience. It's the first time I've ever seen it at West Virginia. You see it at some SEC schools, but I'll tell you what, Andrew Jackson has done an incredible job. You could say he's easily the first or second on our team over the last 4 years in developing talent. That's how well he's done with our defensive line group. And then Matt Moore, who was also at Texas Tech, and I think he may have been at Houston at one point. I'm not sure. I can't remember. It's done an incredible job with this offensive line. But one thing I want to point out real quick is there is a lot, and big emphasis on a lot, of West Virginia boys on both sides of the ball. Do you think Dana's eating his words a little bit? I mean, he famously said what he said. He said it.
Yeah, I think obviously, I guess the game isn't as we're recording this. They're playing like a week. They'll be playing a week from right now. I think if it goes south a week from right now, if it really might be. I think it's interesting that the truth is that the Lions have been a spot. And you mentioned how deep your own defensive line goes. I thought that was a big thing against TCU. Is Houston made part of this problem with the halves? It looked like in the TCU and Tech game, at least specifically, were first half. We're keeping things even, keeping things going, and the depth of a defensive line, or at some point being 350 pounds, is just different than being 305 pounds, right? Like those kinds of things seems to be catching up to people.
Inertia.
Inertia. It's interesting because for what it's worth, the Houston left tackle is going to be a very high draft pick. His name's Patker Paul. He scores crazy high in the Pro Football Focus stuff. He's like 6'7" and like very athletic, like a big build, but not heavy or overweight. Like he's very, very good size. but he's a pass blocking left tackle. There's only so much he keeps the pocket clean, but there's weaknesses as far as size and stuff like that on the rest of the offensive line for sure. A little bit smaller guys at some of the guard spots. Seeing West Virginia play this year, first of all, I would say hats off. I was low like a lot of America coming into the year on them.
Sure.
I'm not too proud to admit it. Like I was wrong, right?
Fair,
but
it's fair.
Yeah, and their trench guys are part of the difference there. I think they're the not sexy names, right? And they're the names that are doing a lot of the work. I've tried to dive in them a little bit this week to get ready for.
Did you hear a lot about Zach Frazier?
A little, yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think they look like a Big 12 team in the trenches. And when you say they go deep, I mean, I keep looking at like there's just new numbers on the field in the D line. It feels like every series, and that's daunting. That thus far this season would give Houston trouble.
Yeah, that's I was on another show earlier today, the Mark Rogers show, and in my opinion, I think that's where I'm when I predict this game, that's what I'm going to be looking at. I think there's a significant advantage on the line of scrimmage to be had for West Virginia in this game. There's also deficiencies for West Virginia that I will not overlook when trying to figure out who I think will win this game. The emotion of it's going to play a factor. There's a lot of factors in this game, more than your average game. But I do think that the West Virginia holds a significant advantage on both lines of scrimmage, which can only bode well for most teams most weeks. You've got a left tackle in Wyatt Milam who has not scored lower than an 80 on Pro Football Focus this year. That is probably, the coaches say he's playing better than Zach Frazier, and most people will say Zach Frazier could be the best center in America. And I'm not trying to over-exaggerate because it's my team. That's really what people were saying about these guys. So I think that's what you look to if you're a West Virginia fan. But you look at Sam versus Manjack, and in my opinion, those guys probably start at 75% of Power 5 rosters. Really good receiver room there at Houston. Tell me why they can expose the West Virginia defense. Do you think they can? Is it all about protecting the quarterback? How do you feel in this one?
So the things that they've done when things are humming for Houston is a lot of short I'll say short plays, meaning not necessarily like sometimes you throw a 3-step fade and you just let it fly, right? But short plays like quick rubs on a slant arrow, or you run like an RPO kind of play where you're running an outside zone with a backside slant to take away that linebacker and kind of make him wrong, whatever. And they're getting the balls in the hands of athletes in space and doing it fast and taking a lot of the, honestly, trying to take pass rush out of it, right? It's been interesting to see when that's effective. Again, looks really strong. And the funny thing is you mentioned Manjack and Brown, and they've had the better year. The two of them have had a much better year than the third starter, Matthew Golden. But like his high school recruit rankings, he set the freshman. I mean, last year Matthew Golden set the freshman receiving touchdown record at Houston. He's not eligible for the NFL draft this year, but he's definitely projected to go pro in 2025. He was the guy coming into the year, and statistically, it is very much flipped. And I think in a couple of the early games, he was catching brackets here, doubles there, can't shake open kind of stuff. And I think he got frustrated. And I think he's still, even if he's not getting that, still frustrated. Because you get in your own head about stuff, right? You're like, you hear all offseason, you're the man, and Tank Dell's gone. It's your turn to be the guy. And I think that is something that psychologically could absolutely be true. He's just a sophomore in college, right? But Sam Brown, who I think your folks would know pretty well, Sam Brown is having an incredible year. He leads the conference in receiving yards, has just the one touchdown, finally got in the end zone last week. And he has had, especially after like a kind of rocky roller coaster year last year, he's had a really, really strong year this year. And frankly, it looks like a much more mature kid because of it. Like he's doing really well.
And the antithesis of who he was early in his career, some maturity issues with Sam Brown earlier on. And I think a lot of us is the reason he's out in Morgantown, unfortunately, because I would love to see him finish his career there.
Well,
Um,
and last year he got in trouble the last regular season game of the year. Houston got upset by Tulsa,
yeah,
had trouble with the running quarterback. I digress. He like hauled off and punched some dude in the face after the game
I
against Tulsa,
remember.
and it like barely
Yeah.
got kind of caught on camera a little bit. And the kid wasn't like hurt or anything, but he had to miss the bowl game because it was like, you dummy, like what? And now he's like Mr. Yes or No Sir in press conferences. He like it, like something just it was like I can't mess up anymore. Like I don't know what the deal was, but someone's like, you can't mess up anymore, kid. And he's a whole different guy.
One of my favorite bands ever, Tool, Maynard James Keenan, the lead singer, has a lyric that says, "Consequences dictate the course of action." And that's probably the case here. I know it's been the case in my life at certain points. I don't want to experience that again. I'm not going to do that again. You know.
Yeah,
So
seriously.
I think Sam Brown's like, realizes he can be a pro, and I think he had some very mature people sitting down and say, "Listen, you can be a pro, and not just an average pro, a good pro." I like him on film. I really do. He's long. His catch radius is really big. He's fast. He's a lot faster than you would think. Anyway, for a guy, he's a
Mhm.
long strider, and his route running is really what's improved. Early on in his career, he really just had to rely on that sheer athleticism. And unfortunately, in West Virginia, we have had, I think, either 3 or 4 wide receivers coaches here in the last 4 or 5 years. So that wasn't going to benefit anybody. And so, I think Sam has had Da'Keil Shorts is a guy that
Mhm.
West Virginia fans really, really have a lot of respect for. He's one of the all-time greats for us. And he was one of the best route runners I ever witnessed. So I'm sure he's probably rubbing off on those guys. And glad to see that for Sam Brown. Don't root against any of these guys. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other West Virginia guys? Obviously, Noah Guzman goes down. Don't
Yeah.
really know how much you guys got to see of him. Tony Mathis is near and dear to a lot of our hearts, and then obviously Mike O.
I think Mike Ode also got in the paint the other day. I've been really impressed with Tony Mathis. He was hurt we've had 5 games now. He's kind of hurt for the middle chunk of those with just an
Hamstring?
ankle, an ankle thing. But it was they described it like it was a nagging kind of deal. I've liked him a lot, and I don't actually know how you felt about and like short yardage kind of stuff. The running back question at Houston's been interesting. They might have found lightning in a bottle with we have a freshman that's pretty fast, but not a between the guards kind of guy. And the in between the guards kind of stuff is kind of falling on Tony. And there have been fans that are, in my comment section about we need to be playing the freshman name is Parker Jenkins. We need to be playing Parker Jenkins here. We need to be playing, Tony Mathis there. That they think that they can fix all the things, right? Everyone's got their opinions. It's easy to coach from the couch,
Mm-hmm.
but
Oh, yeah.
but Tony's been really good between the guards. A lot of the downhill kind of stuff.
That's what he does.
Houston spent the offseason bringing in Amanya Gavi, an offensive line coach who was at Tulane before with Tajay Spears last year. And I think, truthfully, the stuff that Tony does probably fits that scheme more. Whereas Parker Jenkins, the freshman, is more of a off tackle zone scheme kind of guy. The gap scheme, downhill kind of stuff is more Tony's back, in his backpack. And I think that's worked out well for him. I just wish he'd been healthy that chunk. I think that I'm not going to put the Rice game on an injury. There were other things that went wrong, but I think healthy Tony Mathis helps a lot. And who knows what happens there. And again, if we were 3-2, it might feel a lot different. But I've liked Tony.
Amazing what one win will do for their confidence. 2-3 or 3-2.
Right, well, exactly, because that's a game you feel like you should have won. I've liked Tony a lot, though. Tony's been a great find. And Dana commented at Big 12 Media Days, like, I remember recruiting Tony back in the day. I don't know how much of the talk Tony and Dana had back then, but there's a handful of those guys, it feels like. And I feel like there'll always be a connection as long as Dana's at Houston between the two.
For sure. It makes for an interesting ball game. And I want to get into, before we talk about the Houston defense a little bit, just the emotions of this game. How much do you think it's going to play a factor? And how much did TV miss not putting this game in Morgantown? Seriously.
Oh, and
that's the first thing I noticed.
I'm a Houston guy, and I'm even like the TV. I mean, I don't know if you'd have taken
Makes
game
sense.
day there or whatever, but just the signs, the atmosphere. It's a Thursday night game, and those are always a little weird.
Yeah.
Feels like a major, major miss to have this from a TV perspective in Houston. Obviously, it gives the Cougs a little bit of a bump, so I'm not taking that away. But I do think that, and not just because Dana didn't just coach there. He left there on I would argue what feel like bad terms, right? He left a Big 12 school to go to what was at the time a school in the American Athletic Conference, in the heart of SEC and Big 12.
More money.
He got paid more money, but he goes to Houston, which is in the heart of Big 12 and SEC recruit country, and talks about getting better kids, right? Like,
yep.
All those kinds of things are going to leave bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And frankly, and I'm sure we're going to, he's not exactly. There are people that are already ready to move on in Houston, and making comments on other schools' kids and then losing to that school would go very poorly with those people. I'm not a fool. I know that this adjusting to the Big 12 thing is going to take some time. It is not a light switch, even though Dion did a lot of work in one off season. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes and how long they give Dana to do it. But that the schools being intrinsically linked like that is going to make for a fun week of storylines for sure.
And a potential rivalry going forward if Dana, let's say, even if you do lose this game, if you may salvages the season, and I'm not necessarily of this mindset that he's going to get fired. I think it's a fair question to ask, although look what he just did. You just had a good season under him 2 years ago. Clayton Tune and those guys didn't do what you thought they were going to do last year, but they weren't as bad as West Virginia. And what Neal Brown's looked over. Listen, it blows me away that if you'd have told me in week one that coming into this week, Dana is going to be on the hot seat, at least publicly, more than Neal, I'd have bet you $1,000 that's not true, right? I mean, look at what West Virginia's they've had to play 3 Power 5 teams. They started out with Penn State, then they went to Pitt. I mean, it's been incredible. Opening with Texas Tech, you got the cream puff in the middle with Duquesne, and then TCU. That's it. You're telling me we're going to be 4-1 after that? I never would have believed you.
Well, but when you compare the coaches, how hot their respective seats are, y'all beat the 2 schools we've played, right? And I think that does bear some mentioning here.
Great point.
It's the same. I don't think Texas Tech is. People had them as a dark horse from the conference. I don't know if I was quite going that far. Admittedly, I thought Kansas State might repeat though. So what do I know? TCU was always going to look different without Duggan at quarterback. They had a bunch of 1-score games last year. How many of those do you win, right? But they definitely beat Houston, and then they went to Morgantown and lost to West Virginia. So it's a tough look. It's definitely a tough look for Dana right now. And I mean, again, I said at the top, I was wrong in West Virginia. I had them a lot coming off of last season, a lot farther down the totem pole than they appear to be.
Yeah, and that's been the mantra that has fueled this. Before every game, in every practice, they say 14, 14, 14. I don't know if you've seen any of the things with Neal Brown in the press conferences or in the locker room, but before we played TCU last week, his speech to the team was, hey, 14 until proven otherwise. 14. And that's really galvanized this team. And so we're going to be, I think this also bears a little bit of mentioning. This is going to be the first game in which I think we're going to be favored with the Vegas odds. And I'll be interested to see how this West Virginia team plays from a perspective standpoint. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting. Admittedly, Houston has not been, even in their opening game at UTSA, Houston has not been favored. And
oh wow,
I think people saw that game as UTSA was a good team last year, and the game went to overtime last year, and you lost Clayton Tune and da. But this isn't that podcast. I do think there's something about once you're no longer the underdog, where does that chip go? I I've been looking for that chip in Houston though for a minute though. As far as being the underdog, I think we saw it a little bit in the first half against Tech because they came out the gates and played pretty well. But they didn't come out the gates very well against Rice. I guess they were favoring that game. So I think that cuts both ways. I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
And real quick before we get to the key players and key matchups, real quick, tell me about that Houston defense. Just paint me a quick picture of playmakers. Who playmakers are. Who you think needs to step up? Obviously, anybody on the defensive line is going to have their work cut out for them this week.
On the defensive front, Nelson Caesar has had a good year as a pass rusher. He's got 4.5 sacks through 5 games. I think the issue with this team has been if you run the football for 30 or 35 rushes, they do get worn down. They were missing for a handful of games their middleman.
That's going to happen.
Chidozie, his nickname's Dot Nwankwo. The nose tackle is really good, but he was dealing with an injury that kind of limited his snaps early on in the season. Hopefully after the bye week, he's back 100%. He's really good, but he's a 5'10", 5'11", like about 300-pound kind of kid. And truthfully, he takes the nose tackle spot and eats up a double team. But as well as anyone, those nose tackles don't make a lot of the plays. It comes down to a lot of the other guys, right? They might make a play, but not make a tackle. The tackle's got to get made elsewhere. Taj Brooks ran over our face last week, and the Valdez kid there,
he's really good.
Their backup Valdez had a handful of carries as well and had his own 100 yards and a touchdown. Texas Tech ran through Houston. Imani Bailey and TCU ran through Houston. The issue's been stopping the run. I feel like in watching Houston, they've got linebackers that are better at pass coverage stuff. And I think that you're seeing that show up in the Big 12, and then you play these teams that are running into your face. And it's nothing bad about being a pass coverage linebacker, but you're going to need some guys that plug the run, and we've had trouble with that. It probably tells you something that like the leading tackler in the box is a safety in AJ Halsey. Now he is a tackler; he's a good tackler, and he comes downhill fast, but it probably is supposed to be a linebacker, right? So I think that tells you a lot. I think linebackers cover very well, but that's not what they're being asked to do right now.
They won't be asked to do it in this game.
No, and the secondary is completely turned over, especially with Guzman going down, is nearly completely turned over from a year ago. It's a bunch of transfer portal guys. I mentioned AJ Halsey, but they got Isaiah Hamilton was a transfer. Malik Fleming was a transfer. They got a handful of guys coming that are all playing all different spots, are on corners and safeties. And it really does have a very new feeling to it. For what it's worth, JT Daniels lit them up. So I don't know. like JT Daniels had 4 touchdowns in the first half. So maybe I'm getting too bogged down in just the 2 games they've lost against Big 12 opponents. But on the whole, I would say the secondary is a fun group of kids that's good to watch. But I don't think that's what West Virginia is going to do. I don't think that's what West Virginia is going to attack them. And frankly, if I were coaching and I had my druthers, I wouldn't attack them there either. I'd be running through the middle. Yeah.
And that's what we do well, and the thing that makes Zach Frazier so valuable, Dominic Williams is a guy at TCU who plays the nose for them, who commands double teams. And the thing that makes Zach Frazier so valuable is you don't have to double guys like him because Zach Frazier takes care of it by itself. I think that's something to watch. If he's your best interior guy, Zach Frazier will probably try to man him up. Although they do have some combo blocking schemes in the run, in the scheme. Obviously, I'm not saying they don't, but that's why I keep carping back to Zach. I think between the guard and tackle is definitely where this game is going to be lived. C.J. Donaldson, who has not had the year we would expect. He's already, people forget he's only played 15 games at the running back position in his life after coming to West Virginia as a freshman and being a tight end in high school, being switched over to that. I think he's had a little bit of a sophomore slump and still learning the position and how to be a running back and take punishment. And he's carried the ball over 90 times in these first few games. It's almost not sustainable. So he really needed a break. The way he ran against Pitt was not the way he ran against the next two opponents. So, excuse me. We'll see how that works. Jaheim White has really come on. He's averaging 9 yards a carry. And I think a lot of us West Virginia fans are really bullish on that kid. He's really talented. He's a 4-3, 4-4 type guy that is juice right out of the backfield. And he doesn't know enough really yet to mess up, if that makes sense. He's kind of just playing with instincts, you know? So I think he's somebody to watch as an X factor. Obviously, Cole Taylor, our 6'7", 250-pound tight end, is another player in this game I think I would look to as an X factor. And then obviously Garrett Grant, quarterback, who we haven't talked about yet, who really hurt TCU for 2 touchdowns, one really long one on a bum ankle at that. He's so dangerous. And I think, with this run game, with that defense, that's kind of what we're working towards.
You mentioned a bum ankle. I was recording, and so I only saw part of it kind of at the corner of my eye. But I was sitting there while I was recording, talking about, like, man, last week after Houston lost, and I was like, man, and West Virginia is about to beat TCU. He did not look like he was running around hurt. He was running very effectively for a guy on a bum ankle.
He was hurt.
No, the announcer said the same thing. I just couldn't believe it watching him go.
He was about 70% probably, which, he's a kid, he's 4'4", 4'5" himself. So, he's not quite Kyler Murray fast like he was, but he's in that vicinity. So even him, you take a notch off of him, he's still really, and he's football fast too. That's another thing about Garrett Green is he's football fast. So, and that's kind of hard to explain what that is, but you know what I mean, like Jerry Rice was. You know what I mean? So give me your team matchups in this game. Paint me a picture for Houston to win this football game, and then give me a prediction.
So I've been looking at Zach Frazier and Dot Nwankwo, center versus nose tackle. If Dot forces a double team, that's good for Houston. If Frazier plays like I don't know how high a center gets drafted in the NFL anymore. It's a lot more tackles, but I would imagine he's the highest interior offensive lineman drafted, right? If he plays like that, and can man up one-on-one with Dot, I think that frees up a lot of stuff for West Virginia to run, which is scary. I think that's key matchup on that side. I would put on the other side of the ball, with the secondary, it's like you just put the whole thing versus the whole thing, because Houston's going to want to get the ball out fast. The way to take that away would be with press coverage and get up tight, but that also means you're giving away a potential deep shot on a quick 3-step fade or whatever. So if I look at does Malachi Ruffin start right at one corner? I would put how does he work with Sam Brown, or how does whoever's covering the slot? Houston's unique in that they have you mentioned Joseph Manjack. He's a 6'4", 215-pound slot receiver, right? And so that's kind of a matchup problem for a lot of people because he runs slot receiver routes, but doesn't look like your typical slot receiver.
No. He's basically a skinny tight end.
And he looks like, especially because he doesn't wear gloves or wristbands, it's like very old school looking. So, how do you match up there? And then honestly, there's part of me that wants to put a matchup and this is, my perspective on it, obviously, Houston versus themselves, even how much in their own way do they get, penalties and that kind of stuff, kind of a roller coaster of those kind of things with Dana Holgorsen. Y'all know as well as anybody, right? But Dana Holgorsen teams will have a handful of games where they have a lot of penalties. So this is one of those weeks that hurts Houston a lot. And then I would look, frankly, directly at Donovan Smith versus, I guess, the D coordinator. What does Donovan see? How is Donovan progressing as a new quarterback? And those are things that I'm paying attention to from the Houston perspective. I'd be interested to know what ones you feel like I missed because you feel like that certain other ones are important for West Virginia.
Well, yeah, I think you made a great point with Donovan Smith. Obviously, Aubrey Burks, who was a preseason All-American at safety for West Virginia. Scary moment last week where they thought he broke his neck on the field. Our guys had to watch that and come back and play the game of football, right? Which makes it so much smaller.
I didn't mention because I assumed he was out. I guess I assumed.
No, actually all tests were negative. And from what we've been told, yeah, it's a great, thank God.
No, yeah, great for
but
the kid. That's just, I'm sorry, great for the kid. I just meant why, like, I would never have thought that.
oh yeah, same here. I thought he was done forever. I thought we were DeMar Hamlin part two. I was scared to death. I cried. Because you don't want that for a kid,
Never, no.
especially. And this really makes no extra difference, but this is a kid that has a chance to be a starter on Sunday. So I was really like, man, and he's a really big piece of our defense. Lastly, it's the last thing, but brass tacks talking on the show here. He's a big part of what we do and allows our other nickel and spear guy to really roam around and blitz. So he's a big part of it because he's such a good coverage safety and he's a really good tackler. So from what we understand with him, it's going to be up to him. I don't know how much damage was done. We're told all tests were negative, but there's a certain level of trauma that you associate with something like this, and you have to reevaluate everything. Potential second, third round guy or not. I don't know that you still don't evaluate that situation, and then obviously at the wheel spot, who we had a redshirt freshman by the name of Travius Lathan, who came in with C.J. Donaldson, who was probably going to be he was probably going to be a freshman All-American, because he was playing that well. But he broke his leg, and he's the one injury that's not coming back. We replaced him with Ben Cutter, who is probably. I was so impressed with him last week. We're not losing a lot, I believe it or not, with this true freshman that's replacing the kid that was pushing for freshman All-American. So luckily we're next man up with that. But so I think we came out of that game more unscathed than people realize. And if Aubrey Burke can play, all intents and purposes, we're going to be almost the same defense. If Aubrey can play.
I just wouldn't have known. I didn't think to look it up. I saw, again, like I said, I was watching that kind of in the periphery.
Off.
And getting carted off with the neck injury and that kind of stuff, because a concussion, I guess
no
it's
thumbs up.
I guess it's 2 weeks, but I would say a concussion is at least a week, and it looked like it was worse than that. So I mean, hats off to the kid. I hope he's healthy. I hope he's good to go. Frankly, for his sake, as much as anything. I don't mean. I just, when you said that, I was like, "What are you like?" There's no way.
And Neal Brown is not going to say, he won't. No, yeah, he won't let you know. He will not let you know who's hurt and who's not if he doesn't have to. He's just, frankly, right. I mean, now that there's money involved and things are like they are, should there be an injury report? Yes, there should be. I think we all can agree on that. But there's not, and there's not going to be until they make it.
Well, and it'll take some insider. It's not insider trading, but something like that for it to flip that. But just with the expediting of gambling and sports and all of that. As far as a prediction goes, I typically predict ways that the Cougs are going to win, and so I don't mean to be too biased in that. But I do try and find those ways over the course of the week. I think this is going to be a game Houston wins. It's got to be like both teams in the 30s kind of game. So I'd probably sit at like, we'll say 38-35 Houston. I think the way that works out is that, frankly, West Virginia runs the ball well, but it's the kind of thing where like they have a 7-play drive and like the first 3 runs are like 3 or 4 yards a pop, and then they bust one, right? A handful of those kind of drives. Houston gets their 38 in my mind with a couple of those short throws, breaking a tackle and going long. And then, on the occasional, we're going to just get after Donovan, bring the house. They throw a fade route kind of thing because Houston's got some speed on the outside. I like our freshman running back, Parker Jenkins, as far as in this game. I think it'd be more important to get the running back involved in the pass game, get some swing routes and that kind of stuff. And he can boogie a little bit. He's quick. And so I think if it's a game that goes Houston's way, it looks like to me it'll be 38-35, somewhere in that range, right? 38-34 if you get a couple field goals or something. But I do think West Virginia's going to have a lot of success running the football. They're good at it. Houston's had trouble with it. That's a matchup that's made for them. If this game is a big spread, if you came back crystal ball and said, "Oh, the winner wins by 2 touchdowns," I was like, "Well, Houston lost." Like I don't think Houston's going to pull away like that. With the way that West Virginia runs the football, just because the clock won't work like that. It won't happen like that. So that's where my head's at on it.
I feel really good about West Virginia's chances to win this football game. Not gonna lie, and I'm not going. And I picked against us 2-3 times this year. Picked against us Penn State, picked against us for TCU, uh, and almost did protect, but I picked this so 2 times. So I'm not. It's not like I don't do it, but I really feel like we're the better football team. We're in a better spot. I think the line of scrimmage. I've harped on it. I think that's really where we're going to make our hay in this game on both lines of scrimmage. We were able to at times physically impose our will on Penn State, and that was a barometer for us. Although they scored the back down, which Franklin's been doing every week, scoring even 2 and 3 touchdowns on the back end for whatever reason to run up scores. I guess he thinks it's the old days where they look at the score, but
yeah,
he's back. He's been backdoor covering every week, trying to get those style points in. But yeah, we played a tough Penn State game and really held her on both lines of scrimmage in that game. So I think we can do it against almost anybody. I predict this game's going to go kind of like this. I think West Virginia, if it goes their direction, you look at the end of the second quarter and it's probably going to be a 14-6 type game, with West Virginia at like probably 21 minutes control clock, something crazy like that, because that's how things have been going for us. And I think that's kind of what we have to do. And then I look at the final score, no disrespect to Houston, but I'm thinking like a 27-11, something like that. That's where I'm at with the game. I think West Virginia pulls away for a couple scores. And like I said, I don't mean to disrespect the Houston Cougs or Dana, but I think for a couple of reasons, I think our West Virginia kids who start on both lines are going to be really fired up to prove Dana wrong. Neal's going to use that bulletin board material along with 14. And I don't think he's going to let these kids play from ahead, even though they'll be favored in this game. And our special teams have won us a couple games this year. A lot of hidden yards. I think our special teams plays well in that game too. So that's my prediction, man.
Well, and again, I have to give credit where credit's due. The running game would indicate to me that there's a good chance West Virginia controls the clock in this. Houston can score fast. Houston's got big sure. play kind of receivers.
TCU did.
Yeah. But the deal is that if you can grind it down, wear it down, that's the thing that West Virginia does that worries me. Frankly, West Virginia and then Texas has a ton of talent. But that West Virginia running the ball like that worries me more than like we got to go to Kansas State and to Baylor. And I don't know if they're going to be able to quite do that. I would have thought maybe before the year they would do it. Kansas State would do it as well, but West Virginia's had a better year thus far doing it. Yeah. I got to ask you a question though, because I'm intrigued. Mm-hmm. West Virginia's got a fairly favorable schedule the rest of the way. You got to play Oklahoma. Yeah. You got to play Oklahoma. You got to play one of the Oklahoma or Texas. You got to play one. Yeah. Do you think you're about to win the Big 12? Like honestly, like you got a real shot here. It looks like
we got a shot. I mean, you look how it sets up. So obviously, this game is going to be a big one in determining that. You got UCF. Here's what we did. We replaced Kansas State, Kansas, and Texas with Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati. I'll take that every day of the week, and a year that Neal Brown really needs it. Thank you. So yes, yeah. we've got BYU at home. That's going to be big. I think that's going to be the very similar atmosphere to what they're used for at their stadium near Morgantown. But I think a very winnable game. 2 tough teams. You look at West Virginia plays a Cincinnati team that can be tough at times, but I think is probably would outman them. Baylor is the last game on the schedule. I think we can win that game. The only games you look at that I fear for West Virginia are UCF, BYU, and Oklahoma. Those are the 3 games I look at and say, I don't know what's going to happen there. We got to go to the bounce house. I think that's a tough place to play as anywhere in the country, to be honest. They're very underrated there in the bounce house. And so I could see West Virginia slipping up somewhere. That would still be, a 9-3 type season, right? Not, 10-2, not, but I mean, that's in the conversation with possibly being in the Big 12 championship game.
Then you get a 1 game sample and anything can happen.
Yes.
I still don't know what to make. We're going to learn a lot more about Oklahoma in the next 48 hours.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I don't really know what to make of them right now. But as far as I look at it, they're the one program I'd be like, that could be tough. Cincinnati didn't
I
look
don't
the
want to play
same
them.
since the coach left. What's it, Finkel? Whatever. Since he left, I
Fickle.
don't think they're quite the same. Yeah.
Yeah, and they lost all their kids to talent wise.
Yeah, they got one giant defensive lineman,
I
an
saw
early
that.
draft pick kind of guy.
Yeah.
But I say to say that like I am learning more about West Virginia getting ready for the game, right? And I was like, man, like they're 4-1. They got a fairly favorable schedule. Like,
Yeah.
who'd have known?
Yeah. Yeah, it sets up well for Neal Brown, especially.
Yeah.
I mean, if let's say you pick preseason 14th, but do you feel like if Neal Brown wins 9 games with this team that was picked 14th, does he win Coach of the Year in the Big 12?
Man, I mean, it would have to be in the conversation. I guess the deal is we'll see
We'll
if
see what
Sark.
Sark does.
I was about to say if Sark goes undefeated and they they win
Yeah.
every game by a bunch of touchdowns. I
Yeah.
guess that's
Yeah.
But I don't know if they're going to do that. I've been saying this on my show, and it's really been a why not us situation. Texas, and this is living in Texas, you hear about it all the time. Texas is going to lose a game they're not supposed to lose. They just always do. Whether it's they lost to Tech, to Crabtree, they lost to Oklahoma a couple times where they shouldn't have lost to Oklahoma. Like they had more talent than Oklahoma, still lost those games. They lost to Kansas a couple times. If you like they're gonna drop a game they're not supposed to. And if they're anything like the Texas of most of my lifetime, right? And so we'll see what that game is. My calling card has been they're gonna lose a game like that, and they play Houston in Houston, and I'm telling you, like the AD has been on record saying like they can go 1-11 if they beat Texas, right? Like the AD is like very much like if they win that one, we get a raise, right? So we'll see how that goes.
Dana will take it. Parker,
Dana
man,
will take
appreciate
every
you for
dollar.
coming on the show, bro. I really have watched you from afar for a while now, and really respect what you do. Plug your stuff for me here, and I'll cut it out and put it earlier in the show too, because I should have done it way earlier on. I got tied up in the conversation.
No worries. On social media, like all the different versions.
It's at the bottom of the screen, flowing
yeah,
by.
Ainsworth, Parker Ainsworth, Painsworth 512. The show is Locked on Cougs, wherever you get your podcasts. This bye week we've done kind of wrapping up Texas Tech. We've done a little bit about Dana and his contract. A lot of people want to see that ended. It's more difficult than that. We talked about what the ins and outs would be. Did a little bit of basketball preview because we had some downtime. And then next week we could jump in with West Virginia again, man. It's full speed ahead football season. It's been a fun show to be a part of, though. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Locked on Cougs, COOGS.
All right, guys. Hey, by the way, me and you and Coos, we need to collab and do some stuff in basketball season for real. I think we should do that.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I mean, I was excited about Big 12 football, but Big 12 basketball season is going to be fun, man. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, guys. Really appreciate you guys for coming in and joining this. We've got one for Houston, one for West Virginia. We'll see how the game plays out. Still waiting for those Vegas odds to come on the game. Really excited to see how that happens. Let's see what happens. And when West Virginia plays the Fighting Dana Holgersens, as I call them, coming up this Thursday after this. I'm excited about it. Can't wait for it. This has been another edition of Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. This episode is over. Parker and I are out.